If you can see my screen, comment, and if you
Yes.
can hear me well, rather clearly, you can comment. So before we start today's class, if you have a question, please ask. If you have a question, please ask before we start. Any question you have in mind concerning what we have been discussing up to yesterday, you can ask. If you have any question concerning yesterday's class or any other concept that we discussed, you can ask before we proceed. So let's start. So yesterday we covered the basics of a pivot table using a small data, and I want somebody to unmute their mic and tell us what does the pivot table do. Somebody to unmute their mic and tell us what does the pivot table do. Somebody to unmute their mic and tell us what does the pivot table do. Stella, you can tell us what does the pivot table do.
Summarizing data.
Yes, thank you, Hubert. So a pivot table is used to summarize a data set and quickly generate lots of different insights. So don't forget that a pivot table is used to summarize a large or a small data set and quickly generate lots of different insights. So yesterday we worked on a small data set. Today we have a much larger data set than yesterday's, and it has 6 columns: the store column, the category column, the date column, the sales, the margin, and the city. So to start, we want to create again a pivot table, and I want somebody to unmute their mic and please remind us, how do we load our pivot table on our Excel sheet? Somebody to unmute their mic and remind us, how do we load our pivot table on our worksheet? Casey, is Casey present? Peter, you went through yesterday's yes, a question?
Yes.
Yes, tell us how do we load our pivot table on our worksheet?
Okay. On the table, tap anywhere.
Okay.
Then it appears table design on the ribbon.
Okay.
Then summarize with pivot table on the existing worksheet. Then the location, you can place it maybe at H. Then enter. Then OK. And of which mine isn't doing so.
The steps are correct. You have seen I've just followed the instructions. Why is yours not working?
You see on the ribbon, where the tabs, after help, yours is appearing to be power pivot, and mine haina hiyo next ni table design. So could that be affecting?
No. Was the issue happening yesterday? Casey?
No.
Yes, just check. You have given me the correct procedure, so that was good. That is the correct procedure. And for those who did not attend yesterday's class, to load our pivot table from an Excel sheet, just click anywhere on your Excel table. Click anywhere on your Excel table, and this table design tab appears. On our extreme left, there is this section called the tools. Then click on this summarize pivot table, and there is this dialog box that pops up. So we want to load our pivot table on an existing worksheet, so click on the existing worksheet. On the location, click on this row facing upwards, and select where you want to place your pivot table. I want to place mine on cell H1, so click once again on this arrow facing downwards, and then finally say OK, and you have loaded our pivot table. So Casey, have you sorted your issue out?
Not yet. No idea.
So please sort that issue out, because you just gave me the correct procedure to do it. So I hope everyone has done that. And that is the procedure of loading our pivot table on our existing worksheet. So once again, I'll remind you, click anywhere on our Excel table, and this table design tab appears. On our left hand side, there's this section called tools. Click summarize with pivot table, and then you want to load our pivot table on an existing worksheet. But where on our existing worksheet, I want to load it on our cell H1. So click on this arrow facing downwards, and then finally say OK, and that loads our pivot table. Peter?
Question.
Yes, Joseph. And Joseph, you have not been attending the classes, so ask your question.
I'm getting an error when I try to load the pivot table.
What kind of error? What is it saying?
It will not get the data from the pivot table source in the workbook.
Have you clicked on your Excel table?
Yes, I have.
Click on your Excel table, and then this table design appears. On our left hand side, there is this summarize pivot table. Click on it. Then click on we want to load our table on an existing worksheet. The location where I want our pivot table to appear is on cell H1. Hit on that arrow, just say OK, and the pivot table appears. Michael, ask a question.
I have a question.
Yes.
What if you just in a table here just go to the insert tab,
Okay.
then to the far left there's a pivot table.
Have you tried that method yourself?
Yes.
And has it worked?
Yes.
Yes, it is another method that I also wanted us to discuss using this sheet here, named FIFA 23 players. And because that question has come up, so another method of loading the pivot table is by using this insert tab. that insert tab, and as you can observe on our extreme left, there is this pivot table. So click on this cell here, cell A1, click on that cell A1, and then click on that pivot table button. Again, we have this dialog box appearing. So we want to load our pivot table on our existing worksheet, but in what location? Click on that arrow there. We want to place it on this cell Q1. Hit on this arrow facing downwards, just say OK, and we have our pivot table. So that is another method that you can use to load our pivot table. So Casey, have you sorted your issue out? And Joseph?
I think I should just follow. I sort it.
Okay. Joseph, is yours okay?
Yes.
Is yours okay? Has the error gone?
No, sorry, I was a bit late. So I'm just following up so that I'm not left behind everything.
Okay.
I'll let you know if I have any question.
And I hope that you went through yesterday's class. We also discussed about pivot table. The recording was shared. So class, let's proceed. So we want, you can mute your mic. So we want to now drag our fields to various options here. And the first field that you want to drag is our sales, and you want to drag it to our values section. We can drag it to our values section. So drag it, and now you have started loading some data on our pivot table. Has everyone done that? Drag our sales, sorry, not store. Drag our sales field to our values there. Drag our sales to our values field there. Next, we want to drag our store to our rows field. Drag our store to our rows field, and now we have loaded some data. Drag our store to our rows section. Next, drag our city to our rows. Drag our city to our rows there. Drag our city to our rows. Next, I want everybody to drag their category to the filters section. Drag the category to the filters section. And last but not least, we can drag our date to the column section right there. For those whose pivot table was not loaded, you can please try loading it in a new Excel sheet. For those whose pivot table was not loaded, you can try to load it on a different, or rather a new sheet. So next, we want to look at this category here, and you can select a single category or multiple categories to create a subset of data to display on our pivot table. So before I proceed, I want to show you how to load our pivot table here. I'll just undo everything. I want to load our pivot table to a new worksheet. So Casey and Joseph can try loading your pivot table on a new worksheet. So click on anywhere on your Excel table, go to the table design tab and click on summarize pivot table. So and click on load our pivot table on a new worksheet and just say okay, and our pivot table has loaded on a new worksheet. You can try loading it on a new worksheet as I've just demonstrated there. If yours is bringing some problems, you can try loading it on a new worksheet. You can try loading yours on a new worksheet. If yours has brought some problems. So for mine, I'll just load it on an existing worksheet. Again, just a reminder, click anywhere on your Excel table. On the design tab on our left hand side, there's this summarize pivot table. Click on it. If you want to put it on an existing worksheet, you can click on this option here. If you want to load it on a new worksheet, click on the other option here, load it on a new worksheet. For location, I want mine here on cell H1. Click on that downwards row, just say okay, and our pivot table appears. So as I was saying, we should drag our cells to our values section here. Drag our cells to our values section there. Next, drag our store to our rows section. A question? A question? Wisdom?
Yes. At my end of my screen is Eugene Pro is presenting.
Okay. You are presenting something. Can you please show us?
I'm saying at my end. It's someone else presenting, not you.
Eugene, you can stop presenting your screen. You are distracting the class. Eugene? Okay. So let me reshare mine. And I hope everyone can see. Yes, Eugene, don't do that again unless you are asking a question to avoid disrupting the class. So I dragged my cells field to the values, and I also dragged my store to the rows. Next, I want to drag my city to the rows again. Drag your city to the rows, and drag your dates to the column section here. Drag your dates to the column section, and finally drag your category to the filters section. A question up to there? Anyone with a problem dragging their data? Anyone with a problem dragging their data?
Okay, please repeat on dragging the data to those cells.
Okay. So be attentive. So the first field that I want us to drag is the cells, and drag it to the values here. Drag it to the values section. Next, drag our city to our rows there. Hubert, I hope you are following. Drag your city to the rows. Next, drag the stores to our rows. Drag the stores to our rows. Next, drag your date to the column section. Drag your dates to the column section. And finally, drag your category to your filters section. Drag your category to your filters section. And now I hope you're okay. So we can select a single category or multiple categories to create a subset of data to display on our pivot table. And to do that, on top here we have this category which will help us to filter and to display the stores that we want. So I want everybody to try out to click on this store 1. Just click on store 1 and say okay, and our data updates. You can also choose any of your liking, like category 2, and just say okay. So has everyone done that? Has everyone done that? I hope so. So one issue with using this filter area is when we have a field with lots of values, like this category section here has lots of values. We have 10 different categories, and if you want to change the values in the filter or select multiple items, to select multiple items, click on this checkbox here. You can select multiple items in our filter, and this is a very tedious method to use. If you want to select multiple items, make sure this button here is clicked so that you can select multiple items. Just say okay. Looking at our data here, it is not obvious to say somebody, a random person who is trying to read our pivot table. It is not obvious which stores we have filtered unless they come to this icon here and check which items we have selected. It is not obvious for a random person to come and see which stores we have selected. To do that, just click on this icon here and you can see the stores that we have selected, and that is a very tedious method to use. Mwema, ask a question. Peter, you can unmute your mic and ask a question. Wisdom, where do you want me to repeat? Wisdom, Mwema. Okay, you have gotten it. Do you have a question?
Yes.
Ask your question.
You can capture the category. Yes.
Okay. So this category field assists us to filter, and to do that, there was a drop down there. Click on that drop down, and to select multiple items, there's this option here. Make sure it is clicked so that it can enable you to select multiple items. Say for example, we want to filter our pivot table. I can select multiple values. I can select multiple values. and just say okay, and our pivot table has filtered. Are we on the same page? Wisdom?
Yes, we're on the same page.
Okay, so back to what I was saying. I was saying this method is not ideal because when a random person is looking at our pivot table and wants to check what values are being filtered, it is hard for him or her to just observe. So the route that person can use is by clicking on this icon here, so that they can see the values that we were filtering with. So a better way to filter our pivot table is by using slicers. A better way and a recommended way of filtering our pivot table is by using something we call a slicer. And what is a slicer? And what is a slicer, or rather, what does a slicer do? What is a slicer, or rather, what does a slicer do? So basically, a slicer provides an interface outside our pivot table, and it contains buttons that you can click to filter our data. I will repeat. A slicer provides an interface outside our pivot table containing buttons that you can click to filter our data, or rather our pivot table. So in addition to filtering, a slicer also indicates which values are selected, which makes it easier to understand the current filter state. In addition to filtering, our slicer also indicates which values are selected, which in turn makes it easier to understand the current filter states. And how do we load our slicer on our pivot table? How do we load our slicer on our pivot table? To do that, click anywhere on our pivot table. Click anywhere on our pivot table, and then go to our pivot analyze tab. And then go to our pivot analyze tab, and we have this section here called filter. Has everyone done that? Has everyone done that? Joseph, have you done that? Peter, have you done that? To load our slicer, click anywhere on our pivot table. This pivot table analyze tab appears, and you can navigate to this filter section and click on this insert slicer. Then click on that insert slicer, and there is this dialog box that appears. And we want to filter our category, so make sure that filter checkbox is clicked. We want to filter our category, and finally say okay, and we have loaded our slicer. Are we on the same page, everyone? Has everyone loaded their slicer? I'll just repeat the process again. To load the slicer, which will help us filter our data, or rather the recommended way of filtering our data, our pivot table, is by using our slicer. And to load that slicer, click on anywhere on your pivot table. On our pivot table analyze, click on that and navigate to this section here, our filter section, and click on this insert slicer, and then select the category select the category and say okay, and our slicer loads on our sheets. Anyone with a difficulty up to there? Anybody with some difficulties? So drag your slicer close to our pivot table at the end there, and you can see there are some buttons that are already clicked. If you can observe on our slicer, we have our store 2, store 6, store 8 and store 10, and that corresponds with our filter that we did earlier. And you can counter check by clicking on this icon here, and you can observe that we filtered according to our store 4 and all that. Has everyone done that? So we want to remove this filter. And to do that, click on that drop box here, click on this filter icon here, and click on this multiple select and just say okay. To remove this filter, just click on this multiple select items and make sure this checkbox for all has been clicked, and just say okay, and you have removed our filter on our category. Nathan Kimani, have you done that? Nathan Kimani, have you done that? So to remove that filter, click on that icon, click on multi-select items, and make sure this all checkbox has been clicked, and finally say okay. So once more, to extreme right on this pivot table fields, we want to remove this category from our filter section. We want to remove this category from our filter section, and to do that, just drag this away to our Excel sheet, and we have removed that category section from our filter. Is everyone following? I'll repeat. To remove this category field from our filter section, just drag it away like that, and we have removed that field from our filter section. Next, I want us to resize this our slicer. Next, I want a question. Hubert?
I was asking if we can maybe put any field,
Okay.
any to the filters, maybe cells or maybe months, and what we use to maybe decide that we want to put that one to maybe to filters. Which factor do we use to choose?
Hubert, it all depends with your data and what you want to do with your data. We are not limited to what to use. We can also filter our stores or our cities or our months. We are not limited to what field that you want to filter. And the criteria that you'll use, it just depends with the data. It just depends with the data and what you want to do with the data. So for us, I wanted, for example, I wanted us to filter the category. So again, you're not limited to what to do with these fields here. It all depends with you and what you want to do with your data. Is that clear, Hubert?
Yes, it's clear.
Yes. So for now, just follow with the examples that I'm displaying Just follow the examples that I'm using. So I wanted us to resize our slicer, and to do that, just click on our slicer. So on our bottom right, just make it appear this way. Everybody drag their slicer to appear this way, like mine here. Hope everybody is following. So resize your slicer. Next, go to this slicer tab that appears. Next, go to this slicer tab that appears on the top here. Click on it, and on our extreme left, on this section here called buttons, I want to display 5 columns. So I'll clear that and say 5 columns and say enter. So resize once again your slicer, and now we have 5 buttons. And now we have 5 buttons that will help us filter our pivot table. I will repeat for those who have been left behind. So just resize your slicer this manner as I'm demonstrating on my Excel sheet. Next, click on that slicer, navigate to our slicer tab here, and move to this buttons section. Click on that column, and I want us to display 5 columns. Hit enter, and we have the 5 columns. If I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we have 5 columns displayed. Joseph, are you okay? Wisdom, Divox, are we on the same page? Joseph, have you done that?
I'm stuck at the slicer. I'm stuck at the slicer.
Where specifically?
Question: What do we use slicer for? First, I need to understand.
I said slicers, we are using it to filter our pivot table. It is the recommended, or rather the better way of filtering our pivot table. That is the function of our slicer.
So when selecting the data you want to filter in the table, like this one, I can see the category. So
Yes.
you click on the category.
Yes, if I want to filter, say category 2, just click on it, and our pivot table updates. Have you seen?
Yeah.
Yeah, if I click on any button there, our pivot table updates. Is that clear?
Okay.
Okay. So now mute your mic. So as I said earlier, a slicer provides an interface outside a pivot table. So this is the interface, and it is outside our pivot table, and it contains buttons, and the buttons are these ones. They are named 1, 2, 3 up to 10. Those are the buttons, and through those buttons you can click to filter our data. I will repeat. A slicer provides an interface. So this is the interface here outside our pivot table, and you can see it is outside our pivot table, and it contains buttons that you can click to filter our pivot table. So just play around with this. You can click on any number that you want. If you want to filter with a category 2, 3, 4. If you want to multiple select various categories, as I said yesterday, press on your keyboard press Control and just hit on any button that you want. Again, press Control, click on any number of category that you want, and now we have multiple selected our categories. Are we together, class? If you have a question concerning a slicer, please unmute your mic and ask. So a slicer is very important when filtering a pivot table. Again, I'll repeat, it's a better way or the recommended way of filtering our pivot table. It is easier for any random person who wants to see what we are doing. They can clearly see we have filtered our pivot table using this button here, or rather category 1, 4, 7, 10. That makes it easier. A question? Yes, Amos?
I'm asking, how do you make the slicer to have that horizontal?
The way it is horizontal. Mine is vertical.
So originally our slicer was this way. Observe on your screen. So on this on our bottom right here, Amos, so just click on it and just drag it. Have you seen? You can just drag it in any direction that you want. Okay, so mute your mic. Another question? Somebody to ask another question? Ronnie, do you have a question? Ronnie, Casey, are you following?
I'm okay.
Okay. So next. Okay, ask. Nathan?
The way you make it display multiple colors.
Okay. So to do that, I clicked on my slicer. To do that, I clicked on my slicer, and then I navigated on this slicer tab on top of our ribbon. Have you seen that? On our right hand side, there's these columns here. On our right hand side, on our button section, there is these columns, and for us, I wanted us to display only 5 buttons, or rather 5, not buttons. I wanted us to display 5 columns, so indicated 5 and said okay. Is that clear?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I load back my slicer. So to reshape your slicer, just do that, or if you want to expand it in any direction that you want on your bottom right, you can reshape using that. To make it display those columns, just click 5 there and okay, and we are back to where we were. A question before we proceed discussing about timelines? A question? So let's proceed to discussing another concept that is being called timelines. So a timeline is a special type of a slicer that can only take dates as their field input. A timeline is a special type of a slicer that can only take a date field as an input. So once again, to load a timeline, click anywhere on your pivot table. Click on anywhere on your pivot table. Navigate on our pivot table design. On our filters section, next to our insert slicer, there is this insert timeline. Click anywhere on your pivot table. Navigate on our pivot table, analyze tab. there is this section here called the filter section. Next to our insert slicer, we have insert timeline, and I will click on it. Clicking on it, there is this dialog box that appears. Click on date and say OK, and we have loaded our slicer. I'll just repeat. To load our timeline, click on anywhere on our pivot table. Click anywhere on our pivot table to load this pivot table analyze tab. Click on it on our filter section. Next to our insert slicer, we have this insert timeline. Click on it. We have this dialog box. We click on that checkbox and say OK, and our timeline has loaded. Has everyone done that? Wema? I'll just demonstrate that again. Click on anywhere on our pivot table. Navigate on this pivot table analyze option here on the top. Click on it. Go to this filter section. And next to our insert slicer, we have this insert timeline. Click on it. And then click on this checkbox on our date. Just say OK. And now we have loaded our timeline. Are you okay, Moema? If you have a question, unmute. If you have a question, unmute your mic and ask. So for our timeline, as opposed to buttons, we have something that we can drag that is being called a slider across our time period of our data, and I will demonstrate. As opposed to buttons on our timeline, we have a slider that you can use to filter our table. So just place your cursor there and just drag. If I wanted just to display June, drag to June. If I wanted to display our values up to September, drag it to September. Are we okay? Nathan, are we okay? Hubert?
Yes, we're good.
Okay. So we're good. So I want everybody to drag their timeline just below our slicer there and just expand it. Just expand it to be as I'm demonstrating on our screen. Just drag it and place it under our slicer. So I want to show you some features of our timeline here. There is this a question. If you have a question, unmute your mic and ask. If you have a question, unmute your mic and ask. So I want to show you some features of our timeline here. There's this drop down here. There's this drop down here. You can click it, and if you wanted to display years, quarters, or days, you can click on any option. If you want to display years, quarters, months, or days, you can click on any option. So now I want everybody to click on years. I want everybody to click on years. On that drop down, click on years. Joseph, are we on the same page?
Yes.
Okay. So once you have clicked on years, we can drag to display on our pivot table what year we want. So before doing that, you can see we have 2020, 2021, 2022 on our timeline, and that correspond corresponds exactly on our pivot table. As you can observe, we have 2020, 2021 and 2022. So I want everybody to drag their timeline to display 2022. I want everybody to drag their slider to only display 2022. And once we have done that, our pivot table updates and only displays 2022. Once we have done that, our pivot table corresponds to display 2022. So again, if I wanted to display the last 2 years, that is 2021 and 2022, I can just drag our slider there, and it has filtered our pivot table to display only 2021 and 2022. So if I wanted it to display 2021 alone, again, just slide it to display 2021. If I wanted it to display 2020 and 2021, just slide it, and it will display 2020 and 2021. A question? Has everyone done that? Nathan, have you done that?
Yeah, I have done.
So just a reminder, I have said a timeline is a special type of a slicer that can only take a date field as an input. A timeline is a special type of a slicer that can only take a date field as an input. And again, just a reminder, a slicer is what helps us to filter our pivot table. It's the recommended way, or rather it is the better way of filtering our pivot table. A question? Stella? Stella? No, it can't, because it is just something that slides across. It can only return consecutive years. Like I'm demonstrating here, it can return 2020 and 2021, or 2020, 21, 2022, 21, 2022. Is that okay, Stella?
Yes.
Okay. So mute your mic. So rather than just displaying years, it can display quarters. So on that drop down again, click on this drop down and select quarters, and it can display any quarter that you want. Say you want to display the first quarter of 2021, just slide your slider to quarter 1 of 2021. If you want to show quarter 1 and quarter 2, just slide it across, and it will display quarter 1 and quarter 2. Is that okay? So for us, I want us to only select only quarter 1. Just go back to our drop down on years. I want the slider to be only on 2022. Go back to years and slide your slider to 2022. Then go to quarters and let it be only quarter 1 of 2022. So back to your quarters, slide your slider to reflect only quarter 1 of 2022. So next, we can display, or rather we can use our timeline to slide across our months. To do that, on our drop down, click on months. Click on months, and I want everybody to slide their slider to display January of 2022. I want everybody to slide their slider to January of 2022. Once you have done that, is anyone with a problem with this sliding these values? So for our months, slide it to only display January of 2022. So next on our pivot table, it has displayed 2022, and I want everybody to click on this plus sign. Click on that plus sign, and it displays quarter 1 of 2022. On that plus sign, just undo that. On our column labels, there is this 2022. Click on that plus sign to expand our pivot table, and it shows the quarter 1 of our pivot table. Next, click on that quarter 1 again to display the month which we selected as January. Next, click on that quarter 1 to display the month which is January. And finally, click on that plus sign on our month there, and our pivot table. And our pivot table displays the respective days of the month of January. It has displayed the 1st, the 4th of January, 11th, 18th, and finally 25th. Have you done that? Wisdom, have you done that?
On it.
So just click on the plus sign. Click on the plus sign, on the 2022 plus sign, to display the quarter, which was quarter 1 as selected on our timeline. Next, click on that plus sign on our quarter 1 to display our month, and it has displayed our month. And finally, if you want to see the various dates on our month, on our January month, click on that plus sign, and you can view everything, our respective dates on our pivot table. Hubert, are we together?
So we're together.
Eric, ask a question. Amos, Wisdom, Evox, can mute and unmute your mic and ask a question before we proceed.
On my column table.
January.
Make sure on your slider, on your timeline, you select on months, you dragged your slider to January. Make sure on your timeline you slid your slider to January, so that you can display that on your pivot table. Check on it. Amos, do you have a question?
No question.
Ronnie?
Mine has no plus sign on January.
Yours has no plus sign on January.
Yeah.
Once you clicked on months.
Yes.
Okay, it seems that you skipped one step. That's why you're not seeing that. You skipped on one step. That's why you're not seeing that. So later you will review the video, the recording while doing your revision, and it will be successful. Okay, Ronnie?
Okay.
Okay. So again, to collapse our month here, January, just click on that minus sign. To collapse again our quarter one, just click on that minus sign. To collapse our year, just click on that minus sign, and we are back to how our data was. So to remove filters on our slicer and our timeline, there is this icon here. There is this clear filter icon on the top right hand side. On the top right hand side, to clear our filter, click on it, and we have cleared our filter on our slicer. On the top right hand side on our slicer, click on that icon to clear our filter, and you can do the same on our timeline. Click on that, and we have cleared our filters on both our slicer and our timeline. Anybody with a difficulty doing that? Anybody with difficulty doing that? On the top of our slicer and our timeline, on the top right hand side, we have this filter icon with an X. Click on it to clear our filter, and you can do the same on our timeline. So just a reminder, a timeline is a special type of a slicer that can only take dates field as an input. A timeline is a special type of a slicer that can only take a date field as an input. Again, a slicer provides an interface outside of our pivot table containing buttons that will help us filter the data on our pivot table. So up to that juncture, a question before we move on to pivot charts. Is that clear, class? Joseph? Muchiti Joseph? A question? Divox, do you have a question?
No, I don't have a question.
Collins, Kasola, if you have a question, ask. Mwema, if you have a question, you can ask. So next, the final concept that I want us to discuss is the pivot charts. The next concept that I want us to discuss is the pivot charts. And we can enhance our pivot tables, building on top of them to create a visualization of the summary of our data here using pivot charts. So I hope everyone has cleared their filters on their category, on their slicer, highlighting the category and the date on our timeline. I hope everyone has cleared their filter on both their slicer and their timeline. So before we move on to our pivot charts, I want us to do some amendments on our pivot table. Before moving to our pivot charts, I want us to do some amendments on our pivot table. I want us to move our cities to our columns. Move to our cities to our columns. And before doing that, I want us to clear our dates, remove our year dates, remove our year dates, quarters, remove our year dates, quarters, and months. Move the months dates away from our column section here, as I'm demonstrating, demonstrating on our screen. And finally, remove our dates. Has everyone done that? Remove our months, dates, quarters away from our columns. And then finally, move our cities from our rows to our columns. Move our cities from our rows to our columns. Move our cities from our rows to our columns. Next, remove our stores from our rows. Remove our stores from our rows. And then finally, add our category to our rows. Finally, add the category to our rows. And we have an updated pivot table right here. Has everyone done that? Unmute your mic if you have a question. I have said remove the dates, months, quarters from our columns. Remove that and then add cities from our rows to our columns. Add our cities to our columns. Next, remove our stores from our row section here. Remove it completely. And then finally, add our category. Finally, add our category to our rows. Finally, add our category to our rows. Are we together? Enoch? Stella, have you done that? Okay. If you have a question, you can unmute your mic and ask. So the final step, I want somebody to unmute their mic and just tell us how can we load our pivot chart on our screens. How can we load, or rather how can we add our pivot charts? Somebody to unmute their mic and tell us how to add the pivot charts. We discussed about the pivot table analyze tab here yesterday, and somebody please unmute their mic and tell us how to add that pivot chart. Amos, Ronnie, Hubert, anybody with an idea on how we can add our pivot chart? So okay. Yes, Stella. Yes. Okay. Okay. Okay, that is correct, but you forgot clicking on your pivot table first. It is actually correct, but the first step that I want us to use, first click on your pivot table, and then on our pivot table analyze, navigate to our tools, just click on the pivot chart. So that was good, Stella. If you are in yesterday's class, we talked about this pivot table tab in depth. We talked about the sections here and the buttons on our pivot table analyze. So to load our pivot chart, you can click on that pivot chart button, and we have this dialog box that appears. I hope everyone has done that. To load our pivot chart, again I'll repeat, click on any on your pivot table, navigate on your pivot table analyze tab, and finally on our pivot chart we get this dialog box, and by default the pivot chart that appears, it is our clustered column. By default, the pivot chart that appears is the clustered column, and I want everybody to say okay to load our chart on our sheets. Has everyone done that? So next, I want us to drag our pivot chart just below our timeline, there, like that. I want everyone to drag our pivot chart just below our timeline. Has everyone done that? So clicking on our chart, on our extreme right, we have this pivot chart fields. Clicking on our pivot chart, we have this pivot chart fields. I hope everyone has observed that. Clicking on our pivot chart, we have this pivot chart fields that appears, and we can change the appearance of our pivot chart using these fields like we did on our pivot chart. It is quite similar to our pivot table. Anyone with a question or difficulty up to that juncture? Joseph, have you done that?
Yes.
Okay. So we can change the appearance of our chart like I have just said. So we can double click on this legend here. We can double click on this legend here. Has everyone done that? So somebody might ask what a legend is. So a legend is a small visualization representing our chart data here. So on our legend here, you can see Seoul is being represented by blue, and you can see on our chart Tokyo. Tokyo is orange and Vancouver is gray. So you learn more about legends. For those taking our Power BI class, you learn more about legends. So we want to drag, or rather position our legend on top of our chart. So to do that, double click on our legend right here, and we have this format legend section that appears, and I want everyone to click to top on this option here. Everyone click to top, and our legend appears right on the top there. Has everyone done that? Has everyone done that? I hope so. To do that, double click on our legend here, and this format legend section pops up. Click on the top to migrate our legend from the side to the top. So next, if you want to update or rather change our chart style, our chart type, click on our pivot chart, and there's this tab on top of our ribbon here named format. To change the chart type, you can click on our pivot chart and then navigate to design. Sorry, not format, to design. Click on your pivot chart and navigate to the design tab, and on our extreme right we have this change chart type here. Click on it, and you can change our chart type from clustered and you can change it to say to the next option here, which is the stacked column. You can change it to a stacked column. So click on it and just say okay, and we have changed our chart type. Has everyone done that? Joseph, Wisdom, Divox, have you done that?
Yes.
Yes, you can change our chart type by doing just clicking on our pivot chart and then navigate to our design tab here. On our extreme left, or rather right, click on that change chart type, and I want us to switch to stacked column and just say okay, and our chart has loaded once more. So next I want everyone to close this format chart area, close that format chart area so that we can remain with our pivot chart fields. Close on that tab so that we can go back to our pivot chart fields. And I want us to update again our pivot table. I want us to remove our category from our axis here. Drag this category away from our axis. Next, I want us to add our date to our axis category. Add our date to our axis category, and my chart has updated, and I hope yours has updated too. Has everyone done that? Drag, remove our category from our axis section here. Remove our category. Remove our category from our axis, and then finally we can add our date to our axis. Has everyone done that? If you have a question, please ask. If you have a question, you can ask. So the next step that I want us to do, below our pivot chart, there are this plus or minus sign. There are this plus or minus sign that you can use to expand and collapse the pivot chart sections. There are this plus or minus sign that you can use to expand or the various options that we have on our pivot table. So if I click on the plus sign there, you see we have moved to our quarters. If I click on our plus sign, we can move to our quarters. If I click on the plus sign again, we have updated our pivot chart to display the months. If I click on it once again, we are now displaying the various dates in our months. Has everyone done that? You can just click on that plus sign button to expand our fields to years, quarters, months, or dates. You can just play around with it and see what it does. So you can also click on this minus sign here to also select what we want. If you want to select months, date, or years, you can play around with those plus or minus sign. So I hope everyone has done that. Wisdom, have you done that? Wisdom?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So for example, I want everybody to go to our quarters, and to do that, just click on this plus sign here, and you are back to our quarters. Click on that plus sign, and we are back to our quarters. Are we together? A question? If you have a question up to that juncture, please ask. If you have a question, please unmute your mic and ask. So next, I want us to update our chart type. A question? Amos?
My column is showing some funny values like 1.4 E plus 0.9. Like it doesn't show the values of the sum of cells. It could be the problem.
Make sure that you have dragged your sum of cells is on your values section here. Your cities is under your legend section there, and under your axis you have your dates. Is yours that way?
Yes, it's that way.
Are you in a position of sharing your screen?
Yes, I can share.
Yes, please share. So anybody else with that kind of problem? If you have that kind of problem, comment on the in-call messages.
So this is how it looks like.
Okay.
See this.
Try expanding your pivot chart. Yes, try and expand it. Try and expand. So Amos,
yes,
that is happening because your numbers are not feeling well on that category there. So that's why it is bringing that exponential power 9, exponential 1.4, exponential power 9. Okay.
Oh, let me work on it then.
Yeah, you'll just check what the issue, why your values are not feeling well.
Okay, thank you.
So anybody else with a question? Somebody to confirm if they can see my screen. Somebody to confirm if they can see my screen. Somebody to confirm if you can see my screen. Mwema, unmute your mic and ask a question. Which last part do you want us to repeat? Mwema Mwenda, unmute your mic and please tell me what part do you want.
The last part.
Where exactly?
The rows and the column.
On this plus sign and negative sign here. Mwema?
Yes.
On choosing our months, dates, or quarters. Is that the place that you're not getting?
No, the last part and where you are changing the month, date under the axis category.
Yes. You see on your bottom right, on your pivot chart, bottom right of your pivot chart, we have those plus or minus buttons. You can click on that to navigate to months, years, or to display dates. But for examples, I want us to navigate to our quarters. So make sure you're displaying your quarters. Okay, Mwema?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else with a question? Anybody else with a question?
If I have a question,
Yes.
hiyo part ya slicer yenye tumeadd dates hapo sikuelewa.
On part of the timeline.
Yuko kwa yeah.
So I say that the timeline is a special type of a slicer that can only take a date as an input field. So it's just a method of filtering. But using this timeline, we have a slicer. I'll just demonstrate it for you here. So if you want to display only Q1 of 2022, we have this slider here that you can use to slide up to this part here, up to this part of 2022 Q1. Have you seen?
Yes.
This okay. So for further revision, you can just review the recording, which I will share after this class, so that you can see how we use the timeline and the slicer to filter our pivot table. So I'll just clear my filter there to go back to where we were. So I hope everyone is on our quarters. We can use this plus or minus button there to navigate to our quarters. So the next step that I want us to cover is to change our chart type again to a line chart. And I want somebody to unmute their mic and tell us the steps of changing the chart type. Somebody to unmute their mic and tell us the steps of changing our chart type. David, can you please tell us how we can change our chart type from one type to another? Or anybody else?
Okay, I think
Okay.
So you go to the you track on your chart.
Okay.
Then go to the design.
Okay.
When you go to the design, now you can click the options you want. Then you have change chart type.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. So this time around, I want us to change our chart type to a line chart. I want us to change our chart type from stacked column to a line chart. And we can navigate here. Everybody to observe my cursor on my screen. From column, I want us to go next to our line. Click on line and then finally say okay. And now we have our line chart, and now we have our chart displayed as a line chart. Has everyone done that? Has everyone done that? So next I have a question. How do we move from displaying our quarters to our months? How do we move from displaying our quarters to our months? Somebody to unmute their mic and tell us. Somebody to unmute our mic. So Wisdom, can you tell us how we can move from our quarters to display our months? Wisdom or anybody else? Somebody to unmute their mic and tell us how to move from our quarters to our months. Yes, somebody? Is it Victor?
Yes.
Yes, Victor. Please tell us.
You can move to the on the chart, the down part, lower extreme right.
Okay.
Yes. Then there is a plus sign and a minus sign. So you can use a plus.
Okay. That is good.
Yes.
That is good, Victor. So I want everybody to hit a plus or minus sign and then navigate to display their months. Like I've just done here. I want everybody to click the plus or minus sign to display our months. Has everybody done that? So next I have another question. Using our timeline, I want somebody to tell us how to display our last 2 years. Using our timeline, I want somebody to unmute their mic and tell us how we can display our last 2 years. Somebody to unmute their mic and tell us, using our timeline here, how we can display our last 2 years. Somebody? Alvin, is Alvin present? Can please tell us, using our timeline, how to display our last 2 years. Stella? Okay. Then, okay. 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 Thank you. That was good. So to do that, we can go back to our timeline. As Stella said, on this drop down, click on our years, click on it, and using this slide to display 2021 and 2022. I hope everyone has done that. Hope everyone has done that. So next, if you have a question, please unmute your mic and ask before we move to our last concept. Okay, no question. So class, we can do further formatting to a pivot chart directly from the chart itself. So how can we do that? By clicking this plus sign on the top right. You can click on that plus sign and we can use that to format our chart type, our chart elements. So on our chart, I want us to include a chart title. On our chart, I want us to include a chart title. And to do that, I want us to navigate down up to this part here where we have a checkbox of chart title, and make sure you have clicked on it. Click on that chart title so that we can give our chart a name. Has everyone done that? So next I want us to give our chart a name. And what name can I give it? I can say sum of sales over time by city. Sum of sales over time by city, then click enter, and our pivot chart has a title. Has everyone done that? Joseph? Buchiti, Joseph, have you done that? To add a chart title, on our top right, click on that plus sign, and then make sure you have selected the chart title, and the chart title that I want us to use is sum of sales over time by city, and then finally you can hit enter, and our chart now has a title. Has everyone done that? Wisdom, unmute your mic and ask.
Yes, my chart does not have a plus sign when I
Make sure you have clicked on your pivot chart so that we can have this plus sign here. Have you done that?
yes, but it still doesn't have the plus sign.
Doesn't have the plus sign. So anybody else with a similar problem? Mwema, have you done that? Yes. So Wisdom, you, while revising, you can just check on that. Maybe there was a step that you missed that is hindering you from inserting the chart title. Okay, Wisdom?
Yes.
Okay. So let's proceed. If you don't want our pivot chart to display all this information here, we can remove it. And how will we do that? So click on our pivot chart, on our pivot chart analyze. On our extreme right, we have this field buttons section. You can click on it and just say hide all. Are we together, class? If we don't want to display all these years, quarters, months, date, and sum of sales, if you want to hide it, click on our pivot chart, and on our pivot chart analyze tab, to our extreme right, we have these field buttons. Click on it and then hide all. And now we have hide those labels right there. And now finally we have a clean visual of our pivot table using a pivot chart. Has everyone done that? Just repeat. To hide this sum of sales, years, date, quarters, date, months, and date, and these plus or minus buttons. To do that, click on your pivot chart, navigate to your pivot chart analyze option there. On the extreme right, we have this pivot, we have this field buttons. Click on it and say hide all. And now we have a clean visual of our data without those plus or minus sign, expand buttons, the sum of sales, and the months, date, and years. Has everyone done that? Ronnie? I'll repeat again. To remove these buttons,
Yes, done.
you have a question?
I said I'm done.
Okay. So once again, to remove this sum of sales, years, date, quarters, months, and date, and these plus or minus buttons, click on your pivot chart, navigate on your pivot chart analyze tab here, and click on your field buttons. and finally click hide all, and we have a clean visual representation of our pivot data. And now class, we have come to a close to the content that we had for our class. Anybody with a question up to that point concerning pivot, tables, pivot charts, slicers, or timelines? Anybody with a question? Anybody with a question? Joseph, do you have a question? Okay, so I want everybody to click on their FIFA 23 players sheet. Everybody to click on their FIFA 23 players sheet. And I want to demonstrate again the other method of loading our pivot table using a set of data that is not an Excel table. So for the past 2 days, we have been using a pivot table, but for our FIFA 23 players here, it is just a data set. And how can we turn this again to a pivot table? So for a reminder, just click on cell A1 here containing the full name. Click on cell A1 containing our full name, and on our insert tab on top of our ribbon there, on our insert tab to our extreme left, we have pivot tables. So click on it, and we have this dialog box, and we want to display our pivot table on existing worksheet. So click on it on our existing worksheet, but where on our existing worksheet, click on that arrow facing upwards, and I want to display our pivot table on this cell Q1. So click again on that arrow facing downwards, and finally say OK. And now we have loaded our pivot table using a set of data that is not an Excel table. A question, class? A question before we conclude our class? A question, comment, or anything? Anybody with challenges loading the slicers or the timelines or the pivot chart? Okay, so we have come to the close of today's class. So review what we have done today, and tomorrow, which is our final day of our class, we'll just expound more on visualizations. We'll expound more on visualization, and today we have seen how we can visualize data using pivot charts. Tomorrow we'll expound more on other visualization. So a question before I close the class down? A question? Joseph, do you have a question?
No.
Victor, a question? Amos, a question? Okay, so I will share the recording of the meeting. Please go through what we have discussed today, and tomorrow let's meet at 6:20 so that we can discuss about visualizing data. So have a good evening. Let's meet tomorrow. So bye, class.